The Whispering Aisle. Jenny loved the thrill of bargain hunting at her local dollar store. The small, unassuming shop was hidden in the corner of a quiet strip mall, surrounded by a dry cleaner, a nail salon, and a few other forgettable businesses. Jenny had been coming here for years. She knew the aisles like the back of her hand, from the neatly stacked rows of cleaning supplies to the colorful party decorations that lined the far wall. For Jenny, the store wasn't just a place to save money. It was a little escape. Life had been heavy lately. Her job as a receptionist was unexciting. Her social life had grown quiet, and her evenings often felt long and lonely. Strolling through the store, picking up little treasures for $1, gave her a sense of control and satisfaction. On one particular evening, just before closing time, Jenny decided to stop by the store after work. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and the parking lot was nearly empty. She parked her car under a flickering streetlight and walked briskly toward the entrance. The automatic doors whooshed open, letting her into the familiar space filled with the faint scent of cleaning products and rubber floor mats. Inside, the store was quieter than usual. The single cashier, Mr. Hargrove, stood behind the counter. He was an elderly man with kind eyes and a slow, deliberate way of speaking. Jenny had seen him many times before, and they often exchanged pleasantries. Tonight he gave her a small nod as she entered, then went back to reading a dog-eared paperback. Jenny wandered the aisles, enjoying the calm and the sense of being alone. She had a short list of items. She needed a pack of sponges, a bottle of dish soap, and maybe a new set of pens. As she reached the cleaning supplies aisle, something caught her attention. It wasn't a sound exactly, but a shift in the atmosphere. The air felt cooler, and a faint shiver ran down her spine. Shrugging it off, she reached for a pack of sponges. That's when she heard it, a faint whisper, so soft she almost missed it. Jenny froze, her hand hovering over the shelf. She glanced around but saw no one. The sound came again, low and indistinct, like someone muttering just out of earshot. She turned her head toward the shelf, trying to pinpoint the source. The whispering seemed to come from the products themselves. "That's weird," she muttered to herself, her voice sounding loud in the empty aisle. She leaned in closer, curiosity overpowering her unease. The whispers grew louder, though they were still hard to understand. She caught fragments of words: "leave danger," and now a chill ran through her, and she felt the tiny hairs on her arms stand up. Jenny's first thought was that it must be a trick of her imagination. Maybe she was overtired or hearing an echo from another part of the store. But as she stood there, the whispers seemed to respond to her presence, growing more insistent. She stepped back, clutching the sponges, her heartbeat quickening. The fluorescent lights above flickered, casting jittery shadows on the shelves. "Hello," she called out, her voice shaky. No one answered. The aisle was empty. The whispers faded but didn't disappear entirely. She thought about calling for Mr. Hargrove but felt silly. What would she even say? The shelves were talking. It sounded ridiculous. Deciding she'd had enough, Jenny hurried to grab the rest of her items. She moved quickly through the store, her senses on high alert. Every sound, the hum of the refrigerators, the creak of the floor, seemed amplified. By the time she reached the checkout counter, her hands were trembling. Mr. Hargrove looked up from his book and gave her a concerned look. "You okay, miss?" he asked, his voice gentle. Jenny hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, just a long day," she said, forcing a smile. But as he scanned her items, he leaned in slightly. "You heard them, didn't you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Jenny's stomach dropped. "Heard who?" she stammered. "The voices," Mr. Hargrove said, his eyes darting toward the cleaning supplies aisle. "They've been here for years. No one knows why, but if they're warning you, you should listen." Jenny stared at him, her mouth dry. She wanted to laugh it off, to tell him he was mistaken, but the look in his eyes stopped her. He wasn't joking. She paid for her items quickly and left the store without another word. Outside, the night felt colder than before. She hurried to her car, glancing over her shoulder, as if expecting to see someone following her. The drive home was a blur, her mind racing with questions and doubts. By the time she pulled into her driveway, she felt a little calmer. Maybe it was just her imagination. Maybe Mr. Hargrove was messing with her. She decided to put the incident out of her mind. But over the next few days, she couldn't shake the memory. The whispers replayed in her head, and she found herself jumping at small noises in her apartment. At night, as she lay in bed, she thought she could hear faint murmurs, like an echo of the voices in the store. She told herself it wasn't real, but the unease lingered. Jenny tried to avoid the dollar store, but a week later she found herself back in the parking lot. She had run out of dish soap and sponges, and the thought of going somewhere else felt like too much effort. It'll be fine, she told herself as she stepped inside. The store looked the same as always, but Jenny couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She moved quickly, avoiding the cleaning supplies aisle altogether. Mr. Hargrove was at the counter again, and he gave her a small nod as she passed. She tried to ignore the way his eyes seemed to follow her. As she walked through the store, she noticed little things she hadn't before. The shelves in some aisles were dusty, as if no one had touched them in years. The fluorescent lights flickered more than usual, casting strange shadows. And the air felt heavy, almost oppressive, like the store itself was holding its breath. Jenny grabbed her items and headed to the checkout, relieved to be leaving so quickly. But as she stood at the counter, she heard it again, the faint whispers, drifting from the back of the store. This time they sounded more urgent, almost desperate. Jenny's hands shook as she handed Mr. Hargrove her money. He didn't say anything as he bagged her items, but his expression was grim. When he handed her the bag, he leaned in close and whispered, "Be careful." Jenny didn't respond. She hurried out of the store and didn't look back. That night, as she lay in bed, she thought about the voices. What were they? Why were they warning her? And why couldn't she stop hearing them? Over the following weeks, Jenny's life began to unravel. The whispers seemed to follow her everywhere. She heard them in her apartment, in the office, even in the grocery store. At first they were faint, like an echo at the edge of her hearing. But they grew louder, more insistent, filling her mind with words she didn't understand. Desperate for answers, Jenny began researching the history of the dollar store. She spent hours online, digging through old news articles and forums. She discovered that the store had once been a different business, a hardware store, then a thrift shop, before becoming the dollar store she knew. But there were no reports of anything unusual happening there. Frustrated, Jenny decided to confront Mr. Hargrove. She went back to the store one evening, just before closing. The parking lot was empty, and the store felt even quieter than usual. When she entered, Mr. Hargrove looked up from his book, his expression unreadable. "I need to know," Jenny said, her voice trembling. "What's going on in this place?" Mr. Hargrove sighed and set his book down. "I've worked here for 20 years, he said slowly. The whispers started long before I got here. Some say it's the building, others think it's something buried beneath it. All I know is they've always been here. And they always warn people when something bad is about to happen." Jenny's heart pounded. Warn them about what? Mr. Hargrove shook his head. "I don't know. But you're not the first person to hear them. And you won't be the last." Jenny left the store that night with more questions than answers. The whispers didn't stop, and she began to fear she was losing her mind. But deep down, she couldn't ignore the feeling that the voices were trying to protect her from what she didn't know. And as the days passed, she realized she might not want to find out. The haunted mirror. Mark never believed in ghosts, curses, or anything supernatural. He always laughed when people talked about haunted houses or mysterious happenings. To him, the world was simple and logical. If something couldn't be explained, it just meant people weren't looking hard enough. This made what happened next even more shocking for him. One rainy afternoon, Mark decided to stop by a small dollar store on his way home. He was looking for something cheap to decorate his apartment. The store was cluttered with all sorts of random items, plastic flowers, old picture frames, and cheap knickknacks. As he wandered through the aisles, something caught his eye, an old, dusty mirror leaning against a shelf. The mirror was simple, with a rectangular shape and a tarnished metal frame. It wasn't anything fancy, but it had a certain charm. Perfect for the hallway, Mark thought. He picked it up, paid for it, and carried it home. Little did he know, this mirror was about to change his life forever. Once home, Mark cleaned the mirror and hung it in the hallway near his front door. He admired how it made the space look bigger and brighter. It seemed like such a great find for only a few dollars. For the first few days, everything was normal. Mark went about his routine, completely forgetting about the mirror. But soon, strange things started happening. The first odd event occurred late at night. Mark was heading to bed when he thought he saw something move in the mirror. It was quick, like a shadow darting across the glass. He stopped and stared at the mirror for a moment, but nothing seemed out of place. Shaking his head, he muttered, "I must be tired," and went to bed. Over the next few nights, these strange movements became more frequent. Sometimes it was a flicker of light, other times it looked like a figure standing still in the reflection. Each time, Mark would turn around, expecting to see someone or something behind him, but the hallway was always empty. "It's just my imagination," he told himself, but deep down he was starting to feel uneasy. He even considered taking the mirror down, but he didn't want to admit that a simple piece of glass was making him nervous. Then, one evening, things escalated. Mark was sitting on his couch, scrolling through his phone, when he heard a soft tapping sound. It was faint but steady, like someone lightly knocking on a window. He paused, listening carefully. The sound was coming from the hallway. Slowly, he got up and walked toward the noise. As he approached the mirror, the tapping stopped. He stood there for a moment, staring at his reflection, but everything seemed normal. Just as he turned to walk away, he saw it. Out of the corner of his eye, the surface of the mirror rippled, as if it were water disturbed by a breeze. Mark froze, his heart pounding. He stared at the mirror, but it looked perfectly solid now. No way, he whispered. I must be losing it. Determined to prove to himself that nothing was wrong, Mark decided to set up his phone to record the hallway overnight. If there was something strange going on, the camera would catch it. He placed the phone on a small table, aimed it at the mirror, and hit record. The next morning, Mark reviewed the footage. At first, everything seemed normal. The hallway was quiet, and nothing unusual happened for hours. But just as he was about to stop watching, something made him pause. The mirror's surface began to shimmer like sunlight reflecting on water. Then, to his horror, a pale hand emerged from the glass. The fingers were long and thin, stretching as if trying to grab something. The hand reached out, paused, and then slowly withdrew back into the mirror. Mark felt his blood run cold. He couldn't believe what he had just seen. His logical mind struggled to make sense of it. Was it a glitch? A trick of the light? But deep down he knew it wasn't. Something was very wrong with that mirror. Without hesitation, Mark took the mirror down and stuffed it into a trash bag. He drove to the dollar store, determined to return it. When he walked in, the cashier gave him a strange look. Let me guess, she said. The mirror. Mark's eyes widened. You know about it? The cashier nodded. You're not the first to bring it back. We've tried to get rid of it, but it always finds its way back here. It's like it's cursed or something. Mark didn't know what to say. He left the mirror on the counter and walked out of the store without another word. From that day on, he avoided mirrors altogether. He couldn't explain what had happened, but he knew one thing for sure: some things are better left alone. The mystery deepens. Despite returning the mirror, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't truly gone. He avoided the dollar store and refused to talk about what had happened, but at night he often felt like he was being watched. His friends noticed his change in behavior. You've been acting weird lately, his best friend Sarah said one evening. Is everything okay? Mark hesitated. He didn't want to sound crazy, but he also felt like he needed to tell someone. Finally, he told Sarah everything. To his surprise, she didn't laugh or dismiss his story. Instead, she looked concerned. I've heard stories like this before, she said. Sometimes objects can carry energy, or other things. Maybe you should talk to someone who knows about this stuff. Reluctantly, Mark agreed. Sarah introduced him to a friend of hers, an older woman named Evelyn, who claimed to be sensitive to the supernatural. Evelyn listened carefully as Mark recounted his experience. When he finished, she nodded. Mirrors are powerful, she said. They can act as portals, reflecting not just our world but others as well. It sounds like this mirror was connected to something dark. Mark shuddered. But I got rid of it. It's back at the store. Evelyn frowned. That might not be enough. If it's truly cursed, it could still have a hold on you. Over the next few weeks, Evelyn helped Mark cleanse his apartment with sage and protective rituals. She also warned him to stay away from the dollar store and any mirrors he didn't trust. Slowly, Mark began to feel more at ease. The strange sensations of being watched faded, and his life started to return to normal. A final encounter. Months later, Mark was walking through a flea market when he froze in his tracks. There, among a pile of old furniture, was the mirror. It looked exactly the same, with its tarnished frame and eerie presence. A chill ran down his spine. He thought about turning around and walking away, but something stopped him. He felt a strange pull, as if the mirror wanted him to come closer. Against his better judgment, Mark approached the vendor. Where did you get this mirror, he asked. The vendor shrugged. Someone left it outside my shop. It's a nice piece, isn't it? Mark shook his head. You don't want it. Trust me. Before the vendor could reply, Mark walked away, his heart pounding. He didn't look back, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the mirror wasn't done with him. Some things, he realized, are impossible to escape. The doll that moved. Claire was a hard-working single mom doing her best to provide for her young daughter, Lily. Money was tight, so she often looked for bargains wherever she could find them. One of her favorite places to shop was the local dollar store. It wasn't fancy, but it had affordable items that made Lily happy. For Claire, that was what mattered most. One sunny afternoon, Claire and Lily walked into the store to pick up a few household items. As they wandered through the aisles, Lily's eyes lit up when she saw a small porcelain doll sitting on a shelf. The doll had a pale face with delicate features, curly brown hair, and a bright red dress. It looked a little worn, but Lily didn't seem to mind. She picked it up carefully and hugged it tightly. "Mommy, can we take her home?" Lily asked, her big, hopeful eyes shining. Claire hesitated for a moment. The doll looked fragile, and she wasn't sure it would survive long in their small, busy household. But seeing the joy on Lily's face melted her heart. "All right," she said with a smile. "But you have to be very careful with her, okay?" Lily nodded eagerly. "I'll take good care of her. I'll name her Rosie." They bought the doll and headed home. Lily spent the rest of the day playing with Rosie, talking to her as if she were a real friend. Claire watched her daughter with a mix of amusement and love. It was nice to see Lily so happy. At first, Rosie seemed like any other toy. Lily carried her around everywhere, and at night she placed Rosie on the small table next to her bed. Claire thought it was sweet how attached Lily had become to the doll. But then, strange things started happening. One morning, Claire walked into Lily's room to wake her up for school. She noticed that Rosie wasn't on the bedside table where Lily had left her. Instead, the doll was sitting on the windowsill, facing out toward the street. Claire frowned but didn't think much of it. She assumed Lily had moved the doll before falling asleep. "Lily, did you put Rosie on the window last night?" Claire asked as she helped her daughter get dressed. Lily shook her head. "No, Mommy, I left her on the table like always." Claire raised an eyebrow but didn't press the issue. Maybe Lily had forgotten. Kids could be forgetful sometimes. A few days later, Claire was tidying up the living room when she found Rosie sitting on the couch. This struck her as odd because Lily had gone to school, and the doll was supposed to be in Lily's room. Claire picked up Rosie and took her back to Lily's table, brushing off the incident as nothing more than a mistake. But the odd occurrences didn't stop. In fact, they became more frequent. Claire started finding Rosie in strange places all over the house and the kitchen, on the staircase, even in her own room. Each time she'd ask Lily if she had moved the doll, but Lily always insisted she hadn't. One night, Claire woke up suddenly feeling uneasy. She glanced around her dimly lit bedroom and froze. There, on her bedside table, was Rosie, sitting upright and facing her. Claire's heart pounded in her chest. She knew she hadn't brought the doll into her room. Trying to stay calm, she picked Rosie up and took her back to Lily's room. "Lily, did you leave Rosie in my room?" Claire asked the next morning. Lily looked confused. "No, Mommy, she's supposed to stay with me." Claire didn't want to scare her daughter, so she didn't say anything more, but deep down she felt unsettled. Something wasn't right about that doll. The situation escalated one night when Claire was lying in bed, trying to fall asleep. She heard soft giggles coming from Lily's room. At first she thought Lily might be awake and playing with Rosie, but when she went to check, she found Lily sound asleep in her bed. Rosie, however, was sitting in the middle of the floor, facing the door. Claire's skin prickled with unease. She picked up the doll and put it back on the bedside table, telling herself that she must be imagining things. But the giggles continued over the next few nights. Each time, Claire found Rosie in a different spot. One night, Claire decided she'd had enough. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong with the doll. While Lily was asleep, Claire took Rosie outside and threw her into the trash bin at the end of the driveway. She felt a wave of relief as she walked back into the house, convinced that the strange occurrences would finally stop. The next morning, Claire's heart sank when she walked into Lily's room and saw Rosie sitting on the bed. The doll had a new scratch on its face, as if it had been dragged across something rough. Claire's hands trembled as she picked it up. How had it gotten back inside? She had thrown it away herself. "Mommy, what's wrong?" Lily asked, noticing her mother's pale face. "Nothing, sweetheart," Claire said, forcing a smile. "Get dressed, okay? We're going to visit Grandma today." Claire decided she couldn't stay in the house any longer. She packed a bag for herself and Lily, loaded them into the car, and left. She didn't tell Lily the real reason for their sudden trip, but she knew she couldn't go back. Whatever was happening with Rosie, she didn't want to risk her daughter's safety. Claire and Lily never returned to the house. They stayed with Claire's mother for a while and eventually moved to a new place. Claire made sure to buy Lily new toys to replace the ones they had left behind. Lily missed her old home at first, but she soon adjusted to their new life. As for Rosie, Claire never saw the doll again. She didn't know what had caused the strange events, and she didn't want to find out. All she cared about was keeping Lily safe and happy. From that day on, Claire avoided dollar stores entirely. She couldn't shake the memory of Rosie and the unsettling experiences that came with her. but she was grateful to have moved on, leaving the mystery of the doll behind. The endless aisle. Sam was a night owl. He loved the quiet of late nights when most people were asleep. His favorite thing to do was wander around stores that stayed open 24 hours. It was peaceful, and he could take his time without crowds or long lines. One night, Sam decided to visit a nearby 24-hour dollar store. He needed a few things and thought it would be a quick trip. Little did he know, this trip would be anything but ordinary. The store was as quiet as Sam had expected. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly, and the air smelled faintly of cleaning products and plastic. There was only one employee working, a bored-looking cashier sitting at the register, scrolling on their phone. Sam gave a quick nod of acknowledgement as he entered and grabbed a basket. He wandered through the aisles, grabbing a few snacks, some toothpaste, and a pack of batteries. He didn't have much on his list and figured he'd be out of the store in less than 10 minutes. But then, something strange caught his attention. While walking down the snack aisle, Sam noticed it felt unusually long. At first he thought he was imagining it. Maybe he had just zoned out. But as he kept walking, the aisle didn't seem to end. The shelves were lined with the same bags of chips, candy bars, and pretzels repeating over and over. The bright packaging all looked identical, as if the aisle was looping. "That's weird," Sam muttered to himself. He stopped and looked back the way he came. He could still see the other aisles and the register in the distance. "Maybe I'm just tired," he thought, turning to walk back to where he started. But as he walked, something felt off. The entrance to the aisle wasn't getting any closer. In fact, it seemed like he wasn't making progress at all. Panic began to bubble up inside him. He quickened his pace, then broke into a jog. The faster he moved, the longer the aisle seemed to stretch. The neatly stacked snacks blurred past him, yet he never reached the end. Sam stopped, out of breath. He turned around, hoping to see something different in the other direction. But it was the same, an endless aisle stretching into the distance. "What is going on?" he whispered. He called out, "Hello? Is anyone there?" His voice echoed faintly, but no one answered. The store had been quiet before, but now it felt oppressively silent. Even the hum of the fluorescent lights seemed louder, pressing against his ears. Time passed, or at least it felt like it did. Sam had no idea how long he had been walking. His legs ached and his throat was dry. He had stopped trying to find the end of the aisle and was now just sitting on the floor. The cold, hard tiles felt real beneath him, but everything else seemed unreal. He stared at the endless rows of snacks, their bright colors mocking him. "This has to be a dream," Sam said, trying to convince himself. He pinched his arm, slapped his face, even yelled at the top of his lungs. But nothing changed. He was still stuck in the aisle. Desperation took hold. Sam began grabbing items off the shelves and throwing them onto the floor. Chips crunched under his feet as he kicked over a display of soda bottles. "If this is real, something has to happen," he shouted. But the chaos he created didn't seem to matter. The shelves remained fully stocked, as if untouched, and the aisles stretched on endlessly. Just when Sam thought he couldn't take it anymore, he noticed something different. In the far distance, a shadowy figure appeared. It was faint, almost like a mirage, but it was moving. "Hey, over here," Sam yelled, waving his arms frantically. The figure didn't respond but seemed to come closer. Sam's heart raced. Was this person trapped too? Or were they the key to escaping? He started running toward the figure. The tiles blurred beneath his feet, and his breaths came in sharp gasps. The closer he got, the clearer the figure became. It was tall and humanoid, but something about it felt off. Its movements were jerky, almost robotic. Sam hesitated, fear creeping in. But he had no other options. He couldn't stay trapped here forever. "Who are you?" Sam called out as he approached. The figure stopped moving. For a moment they just stared at each other. Then, without warning, the figure pointed behind Sam. Sam turned to look and felt his stomach drop. The entrance to the store was right there. It was as if he had never left. The cashier was still sitting at the register, scrolling on their phone. The sound of the fluorescent lights humming felt oddly comforting now. Sam spun around to see the figure again, but it was gone. Drenched in sweat and trembling, Sam stumbled toward the exit. As he passed the register, the cashier looked up and gave him a knowing smirk. "First time, huh?" they said casually. "It happens sometimes. Don't stay here too late." And Sam didn't respond. He dropped his basket and bolted out of the store, gulping in the cool night air. He never went back to that store again. To this day, he can't explain what happened. The memory of that endless aisle haunts him, and he avoids late-night shopping trips altogether. Whatever that place was, he knew one thing for sure: it wasn't just a normal store. The cursed candle. Emma was a young woman who loved scented candles. She found joy in lighting them up, filling her small apartment with calming or sweet smells. It had become a little hobby of hers. Whenever she visited the dollar store near her home, she couldn't resist checking the candle section. They were cheap, smelled great, and gave her a cozy feeling after a long day at work. One sunny afternoon, Emma decided to stop by the dollar store on her way home. The store was a bit cluttered, as always, but that was part of its charm. She browsed through the shelves, looking for new candles to try. As she moved some candles around, a black one caught her eye. It was tucked in the back, dusty and without a label. Its surface looked slightly uneven, as if it had been handmade. Curious, Emma picked it up and gave it a sniff. The scent was faint but sweet, with a hint of something she couldn't quite place. She hesitated for a moment but thought, why not? It was just $1 after all. That evening, Emma decided to light her new black candle. She placed it on the coffee table in her living room and curled up on the couch with her favorite book. The moment she lit the wick, she noticed something odd. The flame burned taller than usual, almost as if it was alive. She shrugged it off, thinking it was just the wick being longer than normal. As she read, she started to notice shadows on the walls. They danced and flickered, but something about them felt strange. They didn't move like normal shadows should. As the candle melted, Emma leaned in to look closer. The wax dripping down its sides was deep crimson, much darker than she had expected. It looked eerily like blood. She laughed nervously and told herself she was just imagining things. It's just a candle, she thought. Stop being silly. But the strange occurrences didn't stop there. As the night went on, Emma began hearing faint whispers. At first, she thought it was the wind outside. She got up to check the windows, but they were all closed. She even stepped out into the hallway to see if her neighbors were talking, but it was quiet. Returning to her seat, she tried to ignore the whispers, focusing on her book. However, the sound grew louder and seemed to come from all around her. The room started to feel colder, even though her heater was on. She pulled a blanket over herself, but the chill didn't go away. The whispers now sounded like several voices speaking at once, though she couldn't understand the words. Feeling uneasy, Emma decided it was time to put out the candle and call it a night. She leaned forward and blew on the flame, but it didn't budge. Surprised, she tried again, blowing harder. The flame still burned tall and bright. Frustrated, Emma grabbed a glass of water from the kitchen and poured it over the candle. Instead of going out, the flame grew even brighter, as if feeding on the water. The whispers turned into screams, loud and piercing, filling the entire apartment. Emma's heart raced. She covered her ears and screamed back. Stopped in a panic, she grabbed the candle and ran to the window. Without thinking, she hurled it outside. The moment it left her hands, the flame vanished and the scream stopped. The apartment was silent again. Emma stood there, catching her breath, her hands trembling. She closed the window and locked it, feeling a small sense of relief. The next morning, Emma woke up feeling drained. The events of the previous night felt like a bad dream. She went to make herself a cup of coffee, hoping to shake off the strange feeling. But as she entered the kitchen, she froze. There, sitting on the counter, was the black candle. It was completely intact, as if nothing had happened. The wick was unburned, and the wax showed no signs of melting. Emma's stomach turned. How was this possible? She had thrown it out the window. She stared at the candle for a long time, debating what to do. Part of her wanted to throw it away again, but another part of her was too scared to touch it. Finally, she decided to take it back to the dollar store. She placed it in a bag, grabbed her coat, and headed out. When she arrived at the store, the cashier greeted her with a smile. "How can I help you?" he asked. Emma pulled the candle out of the bag and placed it on the counter. "I bought this here yesterday, but something's wrong with it," she said. "I want to return it." The cashier's smile faded as he looked at the candle. His face grew pale and he shook his head. "We don't sell anything like that here," he said firmly. Emma frowned. "But I bought it here," she insisted. "It was on the shelf with the other candles." The cashier backed away slightly, as if the candle made him uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, but I can't take it. You should get rid of it." His tone was serious, almost fearful. Emma didn't argue further. She picked up the candle and left the store, feeling more unsettled than ever. When she got home, she set the candle on the counter and sat down to think. What was she supposed to do with it? Throwing it out hadn't worked. Returning it hadn't worked. She considered calling a friend, but how would she even explain this without sounding crazy? Over the next few days, strange things continued to happen. The whispers returned at night, even though she hadn't lit the candle again. Objects in her apartment would move on their own. Her lights flickered, and the cold feeling never really went away. Emma became paranoid, constantly looking over her shoulder and jumping at every little sound. One night, as she lay in bed, she heard a loud thud coming from the kitchen. Heart pounding, she got up to investigate. The candle was no longer on the counter. Instead, it was on the floor, standing upright as if someone had placed it there. Emma couldn't take it anymore. She grabbed the candle and drove to a park on the edge of town. There she dug a hole in the dirt and buried it. "Stay there," she whispered, her voice trembling. For a few days, Emma's life seemed to return to normal. The whispers stopped, and her apartment felt warm again. She started to believe she had finally gotten rid of the cursed candle. But one morning, as she opened her eyes, she saw it sitting on her bedside table, unlit, but as sinister as ever. Emma's fear turned into desperation. She searched online for anything that could explain what was happening. She read stories about cursed objects, rituals, and ways to banish evil spirits. Most of it sounded ridiculous, but she was willing to try anything. She gathered salt, candles, and herbs, following instructions from a website that claimed to remove curses. That night she performed the ritual, chanting words she didn't understand, and surrounding the black candle with a circle of salt. At first it seemed to work. The air in the room felt lighter, and the candle didn't seem as menacing. But just as Emma started to feel hopeful, the flame ignited on its own. The whispers returned, louder than ever, and the room filled with an icy wind. The salt circle blew away, and Emma felt a sharp pain in her chest, as if something was pressing down on her. Terrified, she grabbed the candle and threw it into her bathtub. She turned on the water, hoping to drown the flame, but it didn't go out. Instead, the water turned red, and the voices screamed in unison. Emma fled the bathroom, locking the door behind her. She spent the night sitting on her couch, clutching her knees and praying for it to stop. The next morning, the candle was back on the kitchen counter, looking untouched. Emma knew she couldn't stay in the apartment any longer. She packed her things and moved out within a week, leaving the cursed candle behind. She never lit another candle again, choosing instead to fill her home with battery-powered lights and air fresheners. Emma's life eventually returned to normal, but she couldn't shake the feeling that the candle was still out there, waiting for someone else to find it. Every now and then she would hear a faint whisper or feel a cold breeze, and she would wonder if it had finally come back for her. But she refused to look, hoping that as long as she ignored it, it would leave her alone.